Welcome to Scott++. Are you working on the right project? Today we're going to get philosophical, talk about challenging our assumptions. How do we know what we know? Right after the intro. You may notice today we're not in a hotel. I had the opportunity to come up to a cabin. Thought it would be a cool place to film the next video. Tricky with the lighting. In the previous videos, I've talked about working on star voting, which is a new voting method where instead of our current choose one lesser of two evils votes, you can give each candidate a score from 0 to 5 stars. And so the results are much more expressive of what the voters actually believe, and I think can bring our politics much more in line with the actual values of our country. However, if we look further back in the channel, previously I had been working on a project called TagShare. It was kind of a mix of a recommendation platform and a bookmark manager. And then after spending a couple months working on that, I finally did some market research, found out that there are already some really good bookmark managers out there that were doing a lot of what I wanted to do with TagShare. I really wish I had found that information earlier. So to not make the same mistake with star voting, I want to make sure that I'm really challenging my assumptions and know why I believe this is the best project to work on. So I've come up with a framework that's kind of like a checklist to help me smoke test my hypotheses, kind of make sure I've done my due diligence and not diving into a new project blindly. I'm going to show what I put together for star voting, but theoretically this could be applied to any project or venture that you're starting out on. So let's take a look. First, I tried to kind of reflect inward and find my primary operating assumptions, right? What do I believe that makes me think this is a good direction to go? For me, it's that one, star voting would lead to progress on some of these critical issues. The climate crisis, giving everyone access to healthcare and education, all that jazz. Even though there are a lot of benefits to star voting, for me it's more of a tool to accomplish kind of these bigger picture ideas. Second is that star voting is the most efficient way to get that done. Even if star voting helps a little bit, if it's not the most efficient path, maybe there are better things I could be putting my energy into to work, for example, directly on, green energy or healthcare or whatever. From there, I broke it down further, right? What are my beliefs that kind of support those core operating assumptions? One is that I believe Americans' values are much more progressive than our current politics. I believe Americans do want to make progress on healthcare, on the climate crisis, these things. Then for each of these kind of sub-beliefs, I went to find some data. And now it's important not to be cherry picking and looking for data to support your claims. You don't want to ask, do Americans want to make progress on the climate crisis, right? Instead, I tried to search for what percent of Americans, support action on the climate crisis. What percent of Americans support Medicare for all? Now, if these numbers were low, right, that would kind of invalidate my hypothesis, and that would be great information to find out early. As it happened, the numbers were actually higher than I expected, especially for gun control. 66% of Americans supporting more action on gun control. It's hard to believe that kind of based on our political situation. But that's kind of the whole point of star voting. Then for what I think is the more important claim, that star voting is the most efficient way to make progress on these issues, I broke it down into a few smaller claims as well. One is that government is the best way to make progress on these issues as opposed to starting an NGO or charity or through private business. And then following that star voting is the most efficient way to help bring our government into alignment with our actual values. For the effectiveness of government, for me, it's really two key things. One, it's some math. If we look at the total federal budget, $6 trillion, that's a lot of money. So if we can steer even just 1% of that towards some of these issues, that's going to be so much more impactful than, if I start my lemonade stand trying to raise money for climate change, I'm not going to get $60 billion anytime soon. And then I also contrasted that, what force is needed to kind of steer those funds. And it turns out, when I looked at all the Republican senators in their previous election, they raised less than $1 billion, which means theoretically, breaking this down into money, you could spend $1 billion to effectively buy the Senate and then give $60 billion or whatever to whatever cause you believe in. So for me, that seems pretty straightforward. And then the second argument is that there are some things that can only be done through mandates, right? Currently, we are giving $10 billion in oil subsidies. And even if we're doing a lot of amazing things with green energy and whatnot, it's still going to be much harder for them to compete while those subsidies are in play. Similarly with like healthcare and education, because so much of this is run by the government, that's kind of the avenue we have to take to accomplish these. Obviously, there are examples to point to in other countries where they do have Medicare for all, where they do a better education, free college education, etc. through the government, and it's working amazingly, right? Why don't we just do that? All right, moving on. Another point on the framework is I want to make sure that I am trying to gauge my confidence level in each of these subclaims. So for the fact that Americans' values are much more progressive than our current politics, I put that as high, mostly supported by the data I had already found. For star voting, we don't really have a lot of data on that because this is something new. It's really hard to find quantifiable proof of that. However, I do feel it flows very logically. Like the whole point of star voting is to let the voters be more expressive. So I'm highly confident in that as well. There are some other claims later on though that I am less confident about, even down to like medium confidence. So those are areas I want to continue keeping an eye on and actively inviting people to challenge me on, right? If I'm wrong about this, I want to be open to that and I want to find out sooner than later. So please, if you see anything here that you're like, no, that's wrong, let me know why, right? And let's get to the bottom of this. All right, moving on to, is star voting the most efficient way to bring our government to kind of line up with Americans' values? Here's the area where I am least confident using the framework. I was sure to bring up counterpoints, right? You want to make sure that you are considering the alternative arguments. One of the main counterpoints I considered is, instead of changing the voting method, why don't we just focus on electing more Democrats and progressives using the current system? My main resistance against that is twofold. One, we've been doing that my entire life, and so far we've only moved backwards in terms of pushing more progress. I feel the divide is getting larger than ever, so that strategy does not seem to be working. Secondly, I did some research as to, for the people who aren't voting, why don't they vote? And there are a lot of different reasons, but a lot of them I feel would be addressed by star voting. Mostly it's like they don't agree with any of the candidates, they don't feel their vote matters, etc. So they don't vote. If we can solve those issues by having more candidates on the ballot, that maybe there is someone you believe in and agree with, then while you're in the voting booth giving your 5 stars to your third party long shot candidate, you might as well also kick the Democrats a star or two. So if it does come down to the standard Republican Democrat, your vote still goes now to the Democrat. And finally, star voting automatically opens us up to more allies. This would appeal to anyone who is supporting a third party, Libertarian, Green Party, etc. Star voting should be your number one issue that you're pushing for. Similarly, we can work with moderate Republicans who maybe aren't excited about the way that their party is going so divided and extreme, right? And they want to use star voting maybe for their primaries. So I feel star voting right now is a much more efficient path. We can get a lot more people on board than just trying to hammer through more Democrats using the strategy we've been trying for my entire life. So putting aside star voting, I've also loved some feedback about the framework. Is this something that seems useful for you when validating your operating assumptions? I've of course thought about spinning this up into a web app and over-engineering the hell out of it, giving you options to create a claim, add supporting evidence, things like that. Maybe it would give you a summary of how many of your claims are backed by data versus anecdotes, etc. Maybe an overview of what sources you've been using, and let other people kind of contribute and comment on your thought process there. If that sounds useful to you, let me know. Could be a cool project to dive into one day. All right, that's enough for me today. As always, thank you for watching. Let's get out there, build some awesome stuff. Or whatever.